Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into the Health Leaders Podcast. I'm here live at the 2025 CNO Exchange in Nashville with Sheila Kempf, who is a CNO with many years of experience and a nursing consultant. And we're going to talk about succession planning, which is a very hot button issue, as we saw in our first session earlier today, which was great, by the
Yes,
way.
it is a hot topic.
Yes, for sure. So what are some of the biggest concerns that CNOs are currently having for succession
I think
planning?
there were two. My biggest concern was actually identifying nurse leaders to put
Yes.
into a succession program. Many nurses, staff nurses, see what the manager's job is, see what the director's job is, see what the CNO job is, and say, no, I don't want that for me.
Yeah.
So that has been my biggest concern, is identifying people who have talent but want the position and want to move up in the position. Now, I heard today at our session that there were some CNOs who said that they were most concerned about new graduates who come out and say, I want your job. And they have no idea what the passage is and what the path is. And so they've actually pulled together some of those new nurses to say, okay, let's go and shadow some people. Let me, pick your brain and see what you think the job is and go from there. So there really are two different facets.
Yeah, it's
One
an
where-
interesting juxtaposition for
Yeah,
sure.
it was. I thought that was very interesting, and but I think that really from my perspective, identifying the right people is key, and so I think that's what we need to do, and then have a development program, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you go about finding those right people?
Lots of different ways. I think that nurses that participate, staff who participate in shared governance, who participate in committees for improvement, those who think out of the box and have a lot of suggestions. Sometimes you find your rebels in your organization who are making life difficult in one respect because they have constant suggestions. They constantly want to look at new things. They can be valuable leaders of the future if you cultivate them correctly.
Absolutely.
So I do look for the folks who really want to be engaged in making things better, want to, have a lot of suggestions, want to think out of the box, want to innovate. And I do look at those. I think that of your nurse managers, you want to see who is ready to move up. So, there's so many levels, the staff to manager, manager to director, director to CNO. And so I look for a particular kind of person. Mainly, I'm actually looking for people who have compassion and who are people. There's a lot of tactical things you need to learn as a leader as you go up the chain. There's many tactical things. We can teach those tasks. We can teach budgeting. We can teach how to do an evaluation. We can teach scheduling. We can teach all those things. But people who have the right inner value,
Yes.
people who have compassion, people who are human beings. Some of the managers that I've seen, they're excellent tactically, but the human being part is a little challenging. So if a staff member is having a hard time and or needs something special, you need someone who actually thinks about work-life balance. You need someone who is going to remember that these are human beings with families, and we have to really adjust to the new nurse coming through.
Absolutely.
So that to me is, finding people who have that inner core care about people. Their employees are excellent candidates for, going into a development program. And so I think it's important as we identify people that we assess them, that we do some leadership assessment, skill set and assessment of their leadership capabilities, the human side, before we let them into a program that we're going to develop the rest of them. So, I think it's very important to identify the people who you think will further your organization and bring it forward, which means we need to identify what are our objectives for our organization. What is it? What are our goals? And what competencies are we looking for? What do we need to tap into? And what do we need to develop to move us forward? It's changed so much. Healthcare has changed so much in the past
For sure.
5 years, 10 years.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're
Especially
looking for
since
different
COVID.
competencies. Since COVID, we're
Yeah,
looking for
yeah.
different competencies
For sure.
and who has a slimmer of those competencies that we can then develop and build on to become better leaders.
Absolutely. And you mentioned benchmarks for measuring, that human side
Right.
of a nurse manager. So what are some of those that you would look for?
So I look for resilience, obviously,
Yeah.
change agents. I look at people who don't resist change. I look for people who say, wow, that's an interesting idea. Maybe we should think about that. Maybe we should develop that. I do have a saying that I do say to my managers and directors, that if people come up with different things they'd like to try, and I use this guideline that says if it's not immoral, if it's not unethical, and if it's not illegal, try it.
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
What could happen, right?
Exactly.
The worst that can happen is it doesn't work. And the best that can happen is it works and you have something new to build on. So I look for leaders who are risk takers. You have to be able to step out of your comfort zone. You have to be able to advocate.
Yes.
If you can't advocate for staff, nurses, then you shouldn't be in the job. You need to be able to build your story of what you need and what they need. And you need to be able to advocate for staff, better working conditions, those kinds of things. So I look for people who are confident. We had a whole discussion at the session this afternoon about how do you build the confidence in some folks? How do you put them in a situation where you can help them to develop that confidence? And by going to someone and saying, we think you'd be a good leader, they've identified someone who sometimes that person says, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
So, if we can identify that and go and give them the confidence to say, yeah, I think you've got the skills and we'd like you to go into this program, because then we give them the confidence to do that, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that's the kind of thing that you need to move forward.
For sure.
And you have to be able to discern who can carry out the attributes that you need and the competencies you need for your leaders, and who is just saying, I want your job.
Yes.
Right? Who are the ones that can actually do it and put the work in? And I think you can tell that from their work ethic, from how they go about participating in the committees, how they go about, accepting change and embracing change. I think those are some of the most important things right now. The world is changing very fast.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. So in a vacuum, in an ideal world, what would I know we all want the secret sauce.
Yeah.
So what would your ideal succession planning strategy look like?
There's a number of things. One, I think you need a defined process, a structured process.
Yeah.
I think importantly, you need the buy-in from your CEO, from your CFO, the financial.
It's a big one.
Yeah, the financial has to be there, and your HR department. I think we need to include the experts, and I think HR is really an expert in human capital. So we need to include them in designing the process and in helping to select the candidates and those kinds of things. They have a different insight and different training than we do as nurses, right? But I think it's important to have the financial resources to do this. I've seen places that they've created succession plans in a vacuum, and it works somewhat, but then there's things that are lacking. So I think having those buy-ins from those key people is really important. And that way you can run a program and you can, really have a development session. Some of the systems have created massive system programs. They bring in software, sophisticated software. They have, the 9 blockers and the different things that they can use to create a succession planning program. And hopefully everyone uses it because it identifies who's next and who's got the skill set. Yeah. And then some places just have to develop their own. But I think having the financial resources is important. I think it's key because you need to get people off. You need to take them out of their existing job and let them go do something else, which means you have to backfill them and you have to provide the financial resources for them to do that. So I think that if you don't have those buy-ins, it's going to be very difficult to go alone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's difficult.
Yeah, and so how do you strike that balance? You mentioned it needs to be structured, but how do you keep it dynamic enough to account for things, like the aging workforce or like staffing shortages or Gen Z nurses who have different expectations?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges in healthcare in general. Just even staff nurses. The range of nurses from coming out of school to I've been working 30 years and I know what I'm doing is quite substantial.
Yes.
So being able to manage all those different genres and all those different groups is a challenge to begin with. But I think if you do some mentoring of the mature, experienced nurses with the newer nurses, I think you can do some cross training, cross pollination between the skill sets. It is amazing to me how many new nurses come out and they have a different standard, which is good. They have, I want my work-life balance. I want to be able to do this job, but I want to have my family too. Whereas some of us, we gave up a lot to do the manager role. And as you know, the manager role is something that's 24/7 and
Never stops.
it never stops. And so you do need to balance the fact that these newer managers coming up want the work-life balance, and they should want the work-life balance. We had a lot of discussion at the session today about how do you make the nurse manager job appealing and manageable. And that is a problem because I was going to say the nurse manager job is the worst job in the whole hospital, but I'll be politically correct and say the nurse manager job is the most challenging in the entire hospital. They have to manage a large group of people, some 50, 75 FTEs. They have to meet their needs. They have everything in management. In administration comes down to, we'll let the nurse managers do it, right? And then they have all the other departments of, well, we'll just give that to the nurse managers. So they're juggling so many different things. And you nurses look at that and say, I don't want that job. Even my own children said to me, I would never want your job, right? Because they see the demands on a chief nurse.
It's tough.
It's tough. And so I think making the nurse manager job a little more manageable is key. And we heard a lot of different things about 4-day work weeks, working remote from home 1 day a week, all different things to make that job palatable, and really assessing within an organization of what demands are we putting on this nurse manager compared to everybody else, and how are we going to help them have a better work-life balance. That way, I think the newer nurses coming in will find it more appealing to go into those roles and then go further up the chain from there. So I think that balancing act is really important. It is tough.
Yeah, especially with, current rates of burnout among nurse managers. I'm sure you can talk for hours on that.
It's staggering. It is staggering.
I think AONL put out a report on it recently with span of control for nurse managers and everything, and it blew me away when I read it.
Yes, the AONL has some very good, here's the steps to set up a program, here's the steps for assessment. They put out some really good documentation, and actually I find a lot of the recruiting firms now are putting out information about, developing nurse leaders and managing nurse leaders. So everyone's getting on the bandwagon of this is a problem. And if we don't solve it, we are not going to have a pipeline of nurse managers.
It's not going to be sustainable.
It's not going to be sustainable. So,
Absolutely.
But I'm amazed at the tenure, even CNOs, the tenure is not that great. They move around a lot.
Is pretty high too right now.
It's interesting. So
So do you have any advice for CNOs who are looking to revamp their succession planning strategies?
My best advice is get as many on board as you can in your executive suite. I've said that already, but I do think having the expertise and the backing of, the CEO, particularly CFO and HR. I think that they can help you build a program that is sustainable and affordable and can really prepare leaders. I do think when anyone says they want to go in a leadership role, I do think assessing them first is a key step, because you don't want to bring in people who really can't do it.
No matter how bad they want to.
And they don't have the core values, that kind of thing. So I think having an assessment tool is very, very essential to assess leadership skills, not tactical skills, but leadership, human capital skills. And just the different, it's a different job. You have to be able to negotiate with other departments. You have to be able to bring everybody in. It's a whole different skill set, juggling balls all over the time. So my advice would be assess the folks as best you can, put a development program in place that actually meets the needs of the organization and has the buy-in from the organization. In fact, it's better to have a plan that's not just nursing. Maybe you can have other departments join in on some of the succession planning, so it becomes a little more generic, and really just stick to a plan. Don't trade off. So if there comes a day when you're supposed to come off duty and go do something, and there's a crisis that day, a mini crisis, but not a big one, not a COVID crisis, but a mini crisis, don't sacrifice. Stick to your guns and let them go and do their program. Don't say, because once you sacrifice once, and it'll be easy to make an excuse the next time. Yeah. So I think you need to stick to your plan, but as structured as you can would be the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sheila.
You're welcome.
And thank you to everyone for watching. Stay tuned for more coverage.
Yeah. Thank you.